Awesome. Okay. So, again, my name is Federico, and I'm going to talk about more money, more problems with Ruby. Uh, I'm from a company called Checkmate. I'm a lead engineer. This might be news because I just started about a week ago here. So it is San Francisco. You get to switch companies very often. But when I built this, when I gave this talk, at Payback Group. I was a CTO there. It's a startup that basically does group payments online. That's where I get the experience from. I worked there for 3 years. But basically is a checkout button, like you see right there beneath the checkout. And then split the cost with Payback Group. You click on it, put down the emails, and we split the bill. So it gets a little bit more complex when you're dealing with fees and chargebacks and all that, and how you split different types of bills between people. So that's sort of my background. But like I did at the RubyConf, I'm going to pull a Puff Daddy, which is, I'm going to change the name of this talk because it really, I'm going to make it as do's and don'ts with Ruby. And in this case, the short version, and with more Ruby. So that's sort of the title of the talk. So let's start with money in database. So has anyone tried this? You can even try it in the inspector in your Chrome or Safari. If you put this number, you would expect to get 0.61, but you will not, no matter what you use. It's not a problem with Ruby. It's not a problem with JavaScript. Believe it or not, it's an inherited problem of computers. Biggest problem here is that that's a float. This is taken from Wikipedia, and basically it says that a float, it's an approximation of a real number. Problem is computers, as we all know, they're ones and zeros, right? So how would you represent this, having ones and zeros? That's impossible. So that's what you get. Some really smart dude came up with float and said, we're going to do like a really, really close approximation. So when you get this number, it's basically that case in which it doesn't add up. So don't use floats when you're trying to store money in your database. Do use integers. There's a lot of things that are inherited from integers that makes it so easy to deal with money. First of all, it's just cents, right? You do 1,000, so that 1,000 cents, that equals $10. There's another way to do it, which is called big decimal, which basically does it for you, kind of. But there are some performance issues. The biggest problem being that you're now offloading this to the database. So whenever you're pulling any transaction, let's say you're doing, if in a good case, you're doing your Macy's and it's Black Friday, so you're doing thousands and thousands of transactions, and you're doing this on a database, and every time you pull it, it will do the conversions. So your database RAM will just go nuts. So you probably want to do this yourself. You're just pulling integers, and then in your system, then you can have your dinos or your unicorns dealing with those kind of things, which is not that big of a deal when you look at it at the application level. There's the other thing that integers give you, which is rounding. So let's see, go back. So it's really cool because you can really store point something in integers. So it's a parity with how money works, and it works pretty well in that case. So you don't really have to deal with rounding numbers, but in the database level. But in the app, as we know, then it's kind of hard to store this, right? And then especially if you're dealing with fractional money, like banks, right? We know that there used to be a problem where zero point 0.1 cent goes somewhere, and then you get that kind of the title of a movie where this hacker writes something that runs in the background and takes zero point 0.1 cent of every transaction because nobody ever looks at it. So basically, this is one big problem. So the typical rounding goes floor or ceiling. We all know those. But do you guys know that there's a gazillion number of roundings? This is just some of them. If you're really into it, you can Google it and spend the next 4 weeks trying to figure out all these types of roundings. Because there's the normal ones, which is like away from zero to the nearest zero, half up, half down, so on. But then you get to like super weird MIT guys writing papers about rounding. Let's just stick to the one that everyone should use, which is called round half to even. Round half to even, also known as banker's rounding. The reason behind this is that all banks use this kind of rounding. There's been tons of studies. There's actually an IEEE standard for it of how you should round, and most of systems actually use this by default. So in Ruby, it's not by default. You have to turn it on. So, but some systems do use it. Basically, what it does is just rounds to the most even number, to the closest even number. So in here, it will round to 20 even. In here, it will round to 20.02. So do round half even. This is how you access this in Ruby. As you see, it's a class of big decimal, but you don't have to use big decimal. Also, a shortcut, you can just call it banker. You know, those little Ruby tricks that we love. Next one, do not mix integer with floats. You've probably seen this before, where you do a division. If you only have integers, then it's fine. When you start combining them, it's when it gets messy, because it rounds it up for you. So you gotta make sure, especially in Ruby, that sometimes it totally allows you to do this kind of operations. So you have to be very mindful of not mixing them. One simple way is to do a monkey patch. Obviously, you wouldn't do this on the Ruby level, but you can do something just for that class, which basically is like whenever you do a times operation, if it's a float, say it's like, you know what, you're not doing it right. Get out of here. If not, just let it go. The other thing, at Payback Group, we actually support around 8 different types of currencies, but you should never do an exchange of currencies of like, you know what, this guy's paying Mexican pesos, let's convert that to dollars. Like, don't do that ever in your applications because it's a mess. What you should do is just keep all transactions that are dollars in dollars, and whatever is like Canadian dollars, keep it in Canadian dollars. Don't switch them up, but do save the current exchange rate because it's important for your analytics and background operations. So at this point, you're like, well, I'm going to be just hitting the keyword all the time and creating all these classes and all this behavior. And this is crazy, right? You end up like this kid, my son. Okay. So you start actually putting Ruby down, which is, let's make a class. It's called money, and you start creating methods, right? But we live in a world where we install gems all the time. Just ask the JavaScript developers last week on NPM. So there's this really cool gem called money. With money, it does like very simple things that help you a lot. Basically, money becomes a class. You instantiate with an integer, also following the same sort of best practices dealing with money, and then you define it as US dollars. So you can then call just cents, currency, format, all these really good things. As you can see from the second line, we're requiring Google currency as a bank. What this does is we tell it, you know what, make it the bank Google currency. So it has an API endpoint that just goes to Google currency and finds the current exchange, and it returns the money with that exchange. But you can also just save the exchange as part of the transaction, so later on you can reference it. So the other thing is background job is your friend. Do not do transactions in the front end. A lot of people are doing less in this, and it's become a more common practice. I can't really see, but has anyone worked with Stripe, for example, or here? Anyways, so what they do is they do a front end JavaScript thing, which they send all the information to the back end, and then it just returns a token, and that gets submitted. So everything really goes into background jobs, and that is like the way to go with money transactions. And here we're just sort of give you an example using active job. It's just you perform the thing in the background, and then you do it later, and then you either have in the front end something listening, or you can do so. In I don't know if you guys seen this, but on Black Friday, most retailers, like the top 5 retailers, won't do transactions in their front end or even in the back end in real time. Basically, you put down the credit card, submit the payment, and then like 30 minutes later, you get an email if the payment was successful or not, and a link to go and retry it, because they just can't do it in the front end. It's way too much load. Another thing, so for example, if you're doing several, let's say you want to split, you want to get money from Tom and pay out Sam without money, and you need to do sort of this like a couple of times. I don't know if you guys can see the problem here, but let's say we had a problem on payout, we would capture 5 times, and payout would never happen. Or we had a problem with the capture, but the payout was successful, and we will always do the payout. So this is super bad. So a way to fix this is by using atomic operations. This sounds kind of fancy, but basically it's being used by 2 things. In Rails, it's called active record transaction, and in Ruby, it's called mutex. In transactions, it's actually pretty easy. And it's the same way that whenever we store something in the database, or we try to store it, if it fails validations or something like that, it will roll back the transaction. But you can take advantage of how Rails works with this and do it on your own. So in this case, we do like transaction, do capture, and payout. If payout fails, it will return the capture. Or if capture fails, it won't go into payout. So that's pretty cool whenever you're doing transactions. This is how you do it in Ruby using mutex. It's sort of the same behavior as that it will roll back. Major difference would be that the thing with mutex and why we want to do it this way is if your behavior, your environment is asynchronous, you don't want to do the capture twice of Tom and then once of Mary, and then you get into like race conditions. What it basically does is you do a lock, and then it will make the transactions to be synchronous in an asynchronous behavior. So now that we live in an asynchronous world and trying to use threads and all this, this is how you would do it. So yeah, mutex, really cool. And this is like a super small example, but it gets really, really complicated. Other best practice is keep a ledger. One of the easiest tips that anyone can tell you about a ledger, and if you don't follow the tip, you will regret it later, is to do this. Basically, you do a transaction-only copies. And the way you do this is like redefining read-only as true. So it makes it so you cannot delete or edit anything in that table. It's really good to keep it record for everything that happens just in case someone, goes and tries to edit your transactions and funnel money somewhere else. Also, things to think about is like, are you gonna let your users delete their cards? How about deleting the gateway? A gateway will be like Stripe. So let's say you have this in your system, which is like, capture $10 using this credit card and capture using Stripe. There's a problem here in which, what if you're not using Stripe? What if later on you get a better deal on Braintree or PayPal or Authorize.net? Or even worse, what if you're not using credit cards? What if you're paying with Bitcoin, PayPal, Doge? So you got to remember that sort of the same things that you do with your code, you should do it with how you think in the logic of your transactions. So you just stub it out, use a gateway, any gateway, and do the capture, and then use any payment source. Yeah, so be mindful of that. So thank you. That is it for my talk. Is there any questions? Let's turn off the screen share. Okay.
There we go. Got any questions?
What's it like working at Checkmate?
What's it like working at Checkmate?
Yeah.
Okay, you did.
It's really cool. I should probably explain what Checkmate is. Even if you Google it, you might not get it. It's one of those things that you have to see the product. But it's a business communication tool, and what we're trying to solve is the same way that you talk to a friend through SMS or WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger or email. We want you to talk to business and companies so they can offer you support or any kind of help or information. So you'll be like, let's say you're staying in a hotel, and it's like, hey, you know what? I'm staying with a kid. Can you guys have a crib? It's like, hi, Tom. Yeah, for sure. You're staying here on Thursday, right? Not a problem. That kind of sort of communication. It's a great company. We're 8 developers. Our stack is Rails API only, Ember, and Elixir for super fast things in the backend.
What are y'all using Elixir for?
So we're using Elixir for search, for so for the SMS we use Twilio to send messages, and Elixir is the one that listens to communications from Twilio and keeps pulling and sends us back. So mostly it's a sort of communication engine in the background, but everything is like API architecture. So it's fun because then we could be using Node at the end of this year or Go or whatever. Any more questions?
Yeah. What are some of your? So do y'all do a bunch of testing with your with some of the money formats that you're doing?
Yeah. So has anyone heard of BCR testing framework? Well, stubbing for stubbing tests. So basically, what it does is, so we hit a lot of endpoints and different APIs, and you get different responses. The problem if you don't stub those, your tests will grow super slow because you have to hit every one of these URLs. So with BCR, you record whatever was the response, and you put that into your tests, and you have a reg task that runs every week that just gets a new request for those. So you're now comparing your test to already saved response, which is just a JSON basically, and it's really cool and it helps a lot. The only problem is if an API goes down, worst case scenario, it takes you about 6 days to realize it from the tests.
What did you do for this company?
Did you
Yeah.
hear the question?
No, I didn't. Sorry.
What did you do before what did you do before this company?
Before Paper Group or Checkmate?
Checkmate.
Okay, I did Paper Group. And before Paper Group, I ran Ruby consultancy in Mexico.
Nice. So how did that go? How did you go from the Ruby consulting to Paper Group?
So I think it works in waves. I got tired of working for different clients and no sort of ownership of a product. Uh, and that's why I eventually moved to San Francisco to work on a product itself. And it's a completely different sort of job environment and how you work and how you think of things. Because sometimes in your consultancy, you know that you're going to work on that for 6 months. And then after that, there's really nothing that is going to happen there. And if everything goes well with that, they're probably going to hire a team to work and build upon what you did. So after doing that for a while, you kind of want like your own product, your own baby.
Yeah. So, and let me ask, and this might be a hard question, but so you went from consultancy to wanting to own your own thing. Why not do a startup?
Well, I was working for a startup, and now I'm working for another startup, but way bigger startup. There's no.
Oh, no, I meant like
My
why
own?
not? Yes, yes.
That's a very good question. And it's something that I still think about. In my case, I haven't come up with a problem that I feel that I should go all in. Um, it's just it's a big gamble,
Yeah.
and you really want to be sure that you're gambling with something that you love. Because if you're not too sure about the product that you might come up with, um, I wouldn't go all the way in. Um, it's better to do sort of learn in the process while you get that idea or product that you will eventually pivot it, but you have to really love it. I guess I'm still
So
searching for it.
say it again.
I guess I'm still searching for that.
Ah, gotcha. So most of us here are from a boot camp. What's some advice you can give to up and coming developers on kind of what to stick to, what to look for? Obviously, you're in San Francisco, so my guess is y'all see a bunch of the technology before we see it down here in South Texas.
Hmm.
So what are some things these guys should be looking for? Whether it's Ruby, whether it's Rails, we know JavaScript's hot, that
Hmm.
kind of stuff. Libraries, that kind of deal to be looking for.
Sure. Um, so, uh, first of all, I think I've interviewed about 150 developers so far. So, I've gotten a good grasp of like what people know and then how they behave. First of all, if you get into if you're interviewing for a company and they make you whiteboard uh, like a super computer science problem, just run from there. That's not the place you want to work. Uh, the usual kind of problems that I would put for developers would be pair programming, sitting with me for an hour and pulling a bug from our system and just going through it. Because that's more of a day-to-day sort of work what you would be doing, or any developer really. Um, so I would say um, there used to be a time where Ruby was enough. Now Ruby is just part of the stack. Uh, you have to know JavaScript, HTML, CSS, and by JavaScript I don't mean jQuery. I mean really JavaScript, how to deal with inheritance, classes, objects, and everything that people just really don't talk about. I think most of JavaScript developers only know jQuery, and that's about it. So I would go into more JavaScript. Not saying the jQuery is bad. It's just it's the baseline. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah, and start digging into like different other technologies and languages. I mean, for example, just digging into Elixir, the way you write Ruby becomes a little bit different. Same happens with Go and JavaScript. So you become a better developer the more stuff you start learning. So imagine that you have more tools in your tool shed, and it really makes a difference between a junior developer and a senior developer. By the way, you know what's the difference between a junior and a senior? The number of mistakes you made. That's about it. A senior has made a ton more mistakes, and so they know what they're dealing with.
Yeah, that's some good stuff. Interesting enough, I've been kind of looking at some books, kind of like the next step JavaScripts.
Hmm.
I think I've seen the book Eloquent JavaScript, JavaScript the Good Parts, that kind of stuff. Are there any other resources you can kind of mention?
Um,
Not
let's see.
jQuery, just JavaScript.
Yeah,
Kind of like,
yeah. I will go into the new JavaScript format, MX 6. Um,
oh, yes.
yeah, and all of its examples is really good. So I used to do CoffeeScript before. And the reason why it was so good is because it lets you do classes and inheritance very easily, and the way it should be, very like Ruby-esque uh, sort of patterns. But with this new JavaScript, you don't have to. It's baked in, so it's super easy to do that, and also it's easier to work in teams, not using CoffeeScript now that this is out.
Got
That's the other thing. You have to be mindful that um, you're most of the time you'll be working on a team. So the way you code in a team is totally different from when you work on your own. So because now you're thinking of like, well, when someone sees this code, will they understand it? Will they be able to edit it? You know, and all those things.
That's awesome. Any other questions, guys?
Any tips for new developers, like general life advice?
So somebody's asking any tips for new developers, general life advice.
Life advice.
Yeah, don't drink and drive. Other than that one.
Okay. I would say one of the things that I look a lot to is contributing to open source, uh, but in a super easy way. So there's a lot of even on Rails, there's a lot of pull requests there, and you'll see one of the Rails maintainers saying like uh, in a comment like, yes, you're right, this is a problem. Can someone please fix it? You only have to do this. This is uh, the opportunity for someone to make a commit, and it'll be either by documentation or a typo. And you don't have to dig deep and rewrite Arrow to get a commit into Rails. I have commits that I have to do with like one line of documentation, but those things make a difference because now you have committed to an open source project, and now you start building on top of that. It's sort of imagine when you do your first like puts, hello world. Think of it that same way, but contributing to open source, and it really scales up really fast. It's just a force of habit, and the people that I know that do this like 2 or 3 hours a day, they're like they got hooked onto it, and they really started with small. And the other thing is, don't be afraid to post things as pull requests or comments, because for example, for my first pull request to Rails, it got rejected 10 times, and it passed on the 11th. So, and one of my friends who was there, who was giving me input, is like, dude, it took me 50, so don't sweat it out. And he was Santiago Pastorino, who's one of the Rails core team. So it you really have to struggle and just go through it. And everyone in the community is super friendly, and they'll be like, you're doing a great job. It's just like fix this, fix that. Eventually, you'll get the pull request done.
Awesome. Did you get to meet Max at the RubyCon?
Yeah, yeah. I already had a picture with him, so I felt like a fanboy if I got another one.
Nice.
I think that's a rule. You're only allowed one.
Yeah, you are allowed one. He threw the peace sign with me.
Nice.
Yeah, he was super nice with me and took a picture too.
Yeah, the only reason I bring him up because he's the one who kind of sets the trend for the whole community of being nice and happy and all that other stuff. Any other questions before? I think we're good. Yeah, how would you, the question is, how would you find your first open source, or kind of what are some of the things that you look for? Obviously, Rails is an open source, but I was listening to Ruby Rogues this morning, and one of the things they said was maybe like nonprofit open source, I can't even talk, open sources, that kind of stuff. But any suggestions on kind of finding your first project to contribute to?
Sure. For me, it was a bit different. For me, it was when you start working with Rails, and this is not a bad thing because you're starting. Your gem file will look like Yellow Pages. It will be huge. You will add everything to it, and then eventually you start trimming it down. You start learning that you don't need that much of gems, but when you're using a gem a lot, you're like, oh my god, I wish it did this, or I wish it worked this way. This is too hard. Why cannot be? And you start looking for, and it might be just a really simple behavior of like a keyword. Like Rails has a third or something like that, and you can go into GitHub and you start looking into the lib directory where the actual code is, and you find that there's a method, and you just copy the method, paste it down, edit a little bit. You can even do this all in GitHub. You don't even need a computer itself. It's just the browser. And that's how you start. You start very, very small with something like, you know what, I use this every day, but I wish it did this other smaller thing. And it's really, really easy to edit current behavior and just tweak it a little bit. And you might not get, you create the pull request. They might say it's like, you know what, it's not that big of a difference. But now you create a pull request, and now you know how to do it. And then later on, it will be like, the counter is wrong. They're using a global variable instead of class method, and so on and so on. So you start digging in deeper, deeper, deeper. But that's, for me, was that.
Good. So I think that's all the questions we have. I want to thank you so much for joining us and taking the time to talk to us about this, man. A pleasure to meet you.
Pleasure is mine. Thank you for having me. And if you ever come to San Francisco, please drop me an email or send me a tweet. We can hang out.
I'll be there tomorrow.
Yeah, I want to go.
Awesome. Thank you.
Hey, thank you. Have fun.